global organization that is designed to connect, educate, and inspire entrepreneurs. And we believe in things like giving back, making friends instead of just mere connections, and helping others in the community, welcoming everyone. Tonight we have a fireside chat that we are doing, as well as a brief Q&A toward the end. And I am the host. My name is Lucas Latour, and my role is product evangelist at a software development company called AWH here in town. I should say at the outset, thank you to our event sponsor for tonight, which is Dickinson Wright. They are a law firm in town, and if you need any help with your startup in terms of legal stuff you're trying to figure out, your entity, you need contracts, you want to figure out how to do equity, that kind of stuff, they're a great company to talk to. So thank you to Dickinson Wright. Tonight we have a very special guest with us, and for the duration of the interview, I would say stay muted, but for right now, I just want to welcome, and if everybody could unmute and just do a little round of applause, welcome to our guest, Densil Porteous. Yay! All right. And Densil, you're still on mute, just as a heads up. But so Densil, you're very interesting. You do so many things. It's hard to really distill it down, but you are the CEO of Pride Fund One. You're the interim executive director of Stonewall Columbus. You are chair of the board of directors of the Create Columbus Commission, and you have Porteous Consulting. So my first question is, who are you outside of work? Do you have any time in your life outside of all of these activities?
Well, well, first I say thank you all so much for having me this evening. I'm really excited to be here and to have a conversation or a fireside chat. I took my shoes off. I'm like getting comfy in my chair.
Yeah.
I will never be. I will say fireside chats made me think of presidents and their fireside chats, and or at least that's what they used to do back in the olden day. I don't know.
Yeah.
I will never be president though, which is part of my story because I'm not from America. I was born in Jamaica, so that's a whole another probably layer that we can talk about. But I think outside of doing all of those things, I have a wonderful family at home. My partner and our foster daughter, soon to be daughter, on the 12th of this week. They keep me grounded and balanced. If I didn't have them, I probably would actually literally work myself all the time. So having that balance of family has been great to keep me checked.
So you do all these things. Why do you do all these things? You have so many things that you got on your plate, and sort of what is it that makes you want to be this involved?
That's a hard one. Why shouldn't you? Why shouldn't I? I don't know. It seems right. I don't do things that don't make sense. At least I try not to do things that don't make sense to me. And, I think everything that I engage with, I bring my full self to because I think it's important, whether for me or for the community that I'm serving in that particular moment. I think that's an important aspect of I think why we do what we do or why we should be motivated to do the things that we do. We shouldn't do things just because. Intentionality in our life and with purpose is actually really, really important. It's probably taken me a while to understand that and get to that place of living with intention and saying yes to the things that really matter. But I do all of these things because they matter. And it's hard to choose and say which is more important than the other at any point in time, because the intersections of my identity and the intersections of these things are so critical and important to our communities.
Yeah, I think so. You have Pride Fund One, which is this venture fund for LGBTQ plus community, right, for founders, and it's like $10 million for the fund. Is that right?
Yes, we are a $10 million fund. Yes.
So that's super incredible, and I do want to dive into that a little bit. But I also, when I was thinking about sort of your story and your journey, one of the things that kept coming to mind was this word leadership. And so I kind of want to take it back to sort of the very beginning and just talk about it, because you do have such an interesting story and background. And just tell us a little bit about your background and like childhood and stuff, and sort of how that shaped you.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think leadership is one of these words I have a a linguistic challenge with.
Mm,
I don't see myself as a leader. I'm just doing what
interesting.
right, because I'm just doing on, again, as I said, I'm just doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Maybe I'm helping guide or motivate or usher
Mm,
forward, and maybe those are all analogies to leader. But
mm,
it's hard for me to say yes, I'm a leader, because again, I'm just living my life the way
mm,
that I think I'm supposed to.
mm,
I'm a first generation American, first generation college student. I grew up in a single parent home. And as I think about sort of my background, I'm LGBTQ in that community. I'm a person of color. I am the youngest of three bio siblings, the youngest of, gosh, I don't even know, or one of sort of 20 adopted and so forth, other siblings. So I think, as I think about sort of, again, all of these facets of my identity, I think they definitely impact the work that I've done. Um, uh, Not in relation to this terminology of leadership. I
mm,
think for me, growing into myself and understanding or realizing that I have an ability to see many different purviews or consider many different aspects of the situation. I think maybe that's helpful for
mm,
someone who sits in a position of leadership or a position that is helping guide. Right. I think if you come to the table with many perspectives, therefore, then you will consider many perspectives.
mm,
I think if you sit at the table with a sort of a singular perspective, which none of us actually truly have, but if we don't have these intersectional identities of self, we aren't always able and capable of thinking about others in the way that I think we should as we lead businesses or organizations, or as we just engage with the community.
mm,
I see each person as an individual, right? Regardless of sort of the qualifiers that we look at, right? Like we may look and say, okay, I see a white woman, and what does that mean? Well, there's more layers to that individual than just being a white woman, right? Like, where are they from? What is their background? What is their perspective of understanding of life? Are they LGBTQ? So I think when I engage with folks, because of my intersectional identity, I think it automatically forces me to engage with each individual um, as an individual, which is what I think we should be doing anyway. But
mm.
um, you know, not everyone does that.
Yeah.
We're not monolithic groups of people.
Yeah. So, and I think a lot of folks have to go through this sort of journey of like self-acceptance and trying to find like who they are and how do they fit into the world. And I think in some of my research, it said that at one point, and maybe, I don't know, even today, but maybe not, you've sort of felt like an outsider with this type of upbringing. And I guess my question is sort of how did you sort of find self-acceptance to become like the person that you are today?
I'm still working on that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we all are, right? I think if we really think about it as humans, we are still all working at accepting ourselves, something about ourselves that we are trying to figure out. And the weird thing is that it's not actually anything that we actually need to accept, right? I think it's always the outward engagement of the world that therefore has us having a tendency of questioning something about ourselves, right? So I mean, when I talk about sort of being an outsider within or an insider within, it's in many different communities. I think in particular, that particular moment was talking about being a person of color, being a Black Caribbean man, working and living in these spaces as an LGBTQ person, but also people, when they see me, they just see a Black man. They don't think that, oh, he's from Jamaica. I was born in Jamaica. I became a naturalized citizen in 2018. Has it been 2018? I think, or how long ago it was. I became a naturalized citizen, and so I'm not only a Black man, I'm an international Black man. So that perspective is added and layered to it. I've been within sort of the LGBTQ community where even within that community, there are these pockets of segmentation that we see, right? When we think about it for so long, LGBTQ representation in popular life has been white cisgendered men. That is more there's much more to our community than that. If you think about it, the LGBTQ community is the most diverse community out there, right? We intersect and cut so many different communities, whether you're thinking about race, religion, socioeconomic status, educational status, all of these different things. When you think about LGBTQ people, you find us everywhere. And so I think we often forget that even within these large groups or groups of association, we have segments of ourselves that we don't always welcome wholly.
Mm,
And for so long, the LGBTQ community didn't do that. The LGBTQ community was sort of this sort of one singular group seen in the world. Again, gendered white men for so long. And then it sort of has spilled into other facets of community. But again, we're much more than just that.
And how do you think about sort of like the importance of representation in these spaces, and I guess like how the world is evolving and changing? Might be too amorphous of a question, but like,
No,
but
no, not at all. No, not at all. I mean, actually, I think for a while, I've said it for a long time. I'm sure people have said it. Representation matters, right? And on my Twitter profile, I think right now that's my background picture, and it was for a while on my Facebook profiles. But representation matters. It always matters. I think even in this moment, you know, I found myself. I found myself crying as we were driving back from the grocery store this Saturday after we heard the results of the election, or whatever was called in that particular moment. And for me, I found myself crying not because a decision was made, but because of who the vice president was, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, I'm raising a child. I'm raising a Black daughter. And in this moment, I thought to myself, my daughter doesn't have to dream any longer. She can look and see that this is a future and a possibility for her. And so representation matters in those spaces. If you don't see yourself, then you can never believe it may happen for you. And all you can do is dream about it. And so it's important for us in whatever seat that we are able to sit in, that if we have the opportunity to make someone's dream a reality, then we should. And so I think that's why representation matters, right? Like I don't see myself as a role model. That's also a hard word that you don't want to hold on to. I'm just living my life the way that I want to live, or I believe is the right way. And I'm ensuring that I'm intentional about the spaces I show up in, because there are young Black and brown, gay, international folks out there who don't see themselves in these spaces. And when they see me in these spaces, or people that look like me or look like themselves in these spaces, they then feel empowered to believe that they can do those things. You know, it's literally why I think I do all the things that I do now. I jokingly start to say I'm a professional gay, right? Like I'm paid in these spaces because of my identity and perspective as a gay Black person, and that's beautiful to me, and important to continue to show up in these spaces. You know, and I think as our society continues to evolve and change, I think we will see that representation of this sort is so important. So that we can always believe that we can be in these spaces. You know, again, if we continually see the same faces of the same folks in these spaces, in these places, then we will never believe that we can be there. You know, and yes, someone will dare to dream, but think of so many others who won't dare to dream because they just have never seen.
Yeah. One of the things that I've noticed, a couple of the answers, you sort of have a little bit of a resistance, you said, like linguistically around these words like leadership or role model and stuff. And I wanted to just sort of ask a follow-up question. What sort of is behind that reluctance to be seen or use those terms in that way for you? Why is it important to sort of reframe that conversation?
I don't know if it's important. This is just a me thing.
Okay.
You know, it's a me thing. I mean, someone else might believe that they're a leader, and someone might totally and wholly own that. And I might see people that I might say, now that's a leader. I might prescribe that to someone, but I think I have a challenge for myself, because again, all I'm doing is doing the right thing, like what I believe is right. And so if that is leadership, then great. Then okay. But I think that as I've grown up, or in the places that I've been in, I don't believe that I've allowed myself to have the ego that I think you may have to have in those spaces to be a leader. You know, and I'm not saying you have to have this huge, large ego. I think there is a bit of ego that does come when someone starts to own that and use that. I wasn't raised that way, right? My mom didn't teach me that I was any better than someone else. She said you are equal to, and you are able to be successful, and so just strive and try. So I think, and again, that's each individual's upbringing. There's nothing wrong with that. I think parents who encourage their kids to say you can be better than so and so, that's wonderful. That's empowerment for them. But that's just not the way that I was raised. And so
Yeah.
I think for me, it's really a reflection of equity in moments. I have a hard time, not saying that I have a hard time representing and approving and recognizing leadership, but I have a hard time even in those spaces, thinking that someone knows everything, and therefore then they aren't able to take information from someone who's a subordinate or someone who's less than in the space that they're in. So leaders come from the craziest and most wonderful of places. So again, I have a hard time holding on to that for me.
Yeah.
But I think it's a beautiful thing when someone can see that in someone and understand what it means.
Yeah. So I kind of also want to ask a little bit of follow up on this because, just coming from what you've come from and the experiences that you've had, you might think, and this may be completely wrong, that like someone that goes through that journey sort of has to build confidence, right? And so sometimes people might attach on to these words like leader or role model and see themselves in that light. And I guess sort of how do you think about confidence and like did you have to go through a journey to build confidence to do the things that you do, and like where do you find that?
I don't think I'm confident.
Oh
I will
wow.
tell
Okay.
you that. I will tell you that.
That's good.
I
Yeah.
don't. And I think, but I think that's. I think I think I seek to find moments of confidence in the work that I'm doing.
Mm,
Right. That gives me confidence. If I know that I'm doing the right thing,
mm,
then I have to do it. If it's the
mm,
right thing, then that's where the confidence comes from. But I will tell you that I I'm nervous in public speaking moments.
mm,
Even in front of a group of 4 people, if I have to sort of guide and give direction, I always start off from being nervous. It's just
mm.
because it's funny now. I never used the language or terms before, but everyone's been watching Hamilton now, I think, right? Because it's on demand. But history has its eyes on you, right? Like I think I have always understood in some way, shape, or form that especially as a Black man, in moments of management and leadership, that everyone is paying attention and everyone is watching, sometimes even more than, because for so many reasons, whether they want to see you succeed or fail, I think they're paying attention. And so confidence in those spaces have oftentimes been hard for me. But
Mm.
again, as I said, I believe I like to do the right thing, and so therefore that's where I get confidence from. When I have to speak in front of panels or get on stage, I'm turning something on. Right? Like it's sort of like, okay, you got to do it now. You might have just sweated a puddle behind stage, but now you're out there and they're listening, and you have an opportunity to share something. I believe in I love to say learn some, share some, right? So again, for me, if I'm in these moments and spaces where no matter how nervous I am, people have come together, and I hope I can share something that I've learned that helps them move forward in some way, shape, or form. So I am confident. I don't know.
Interesting.
I speak up when it's appropriate, because other people, maybe there are other people who don't have the voice in that moment, and I know that I have the voice, but I don't know. Confident.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, it's these
No.
words of I don't know. They're I don't know. Maybe yeah. It's it's a struggle I've had.
No, and it's great to hear your perspective on that because, sometimes you think, well, you always have to be the most confident person in the world if you want to be successful or do great things, and I think it's an
You
important
just have to
reminder.
believe. You have to believe in yourself and the things that you're doing. I don't know if
Mm,
that's confidence, but I think it's belief in self. If that's confidence, then sure. But I think you have to believe in yourself. That's what it is. To be
mm,
successful, to be driven or whatever. I think you just have to have belief in yourself. Right? Like if you can't believe in yourself, then you can't do anything. And so I think whatever you're putting out in the world, whatever you're working on, which is why it's so important for even the Pride Fund to say, you have to bring your full self to the work that you're doing. So if you were LGBTQ community, and maybe that was part of the inspiration for the work that you're doing. So if you can't, again, be proud of who you are and bring your full self to everything, yeah, I don't know.
yeah, it's much harder.
And it takes a while
Um,
to get there, because I will tell you, I've not been in every work environment that I've been in has not been one that has been championing of who I am as an individual. I think if nothing, I've been in a lot of work environments where people have felt threatened by who I was or how I presented, and that made it difficult for me to stick around in those workspaces. But oftentimes, as I'm managing others, I stuck around partly because I wanted to ensure that those who I was managing saw uh, appropriate representation of what someone should be, and how a manager should be, or how someone who's guiding their work should be. I stuck around because I wanted to ensure that those staff members who I was guiding understood their value and their worth, so that when I wasn't there in the future, or if they chose to leave the place that we were at, they at least took that lesson with them, right? Learn some, share some. Like over time, I learned those things, and it was only until this last year in January where I finally hit my own personal wall and said, you need to stop working in these spaces and places that aren't fully accepting of you. You need to stop being in these places and spaces that are using you more so than they are uplifting you. And that's part of the reason why I've leaned into to my own consulting work, into the nonprofit and volunteer work that I do, into the Pride Fund, into working with Stonewall, because I've finally found these places and spaces that fully welcome me, fully appreciate sort of what I can bring to the table, but also are challenging me and allowing me to open up doors and give access to others who need it, and who oftentimes may not, again, as I said earlier, have their voice, or have known that they need to be empowered to use their voice in certain ways.
Yeah. So let's turn a little bit to the Pride Fund One, and sort of talk about like why did this come about? Like, what was the need that was seen for a fund like this, and sort of what's the vision for the fund?
Yeah, yeah. So I can't take credit for that. I will say that I'm lucky to have been in the space and place when brilliant minds were coming together to think about the Pride Fund and what it should be. And that was over, gosh, now a year and a half. I'll just say about a year and a half ago. It's probably a year and 4 months, but a year and a half ago, when my good friend Wolf came to a number of us here in Columbus, and said, I have this idea. I think it's really, really important. However, as a cisgendered white dude, I don't know that I should be the only one sort of leading this charge. And he went around to our friends here in Columbus, some really great folks. In particular, working with Loud Capital, which is sort of our older or big sibling company, and started gathering venture partners, so influential folks, creative minds, investment partners, entrepreneurs, to come together and really think about what it meant to invest in and uplift the LGBTQ community through venture. What did that mean for us? And initially started out just here in Columbus. That was where the sort of the inception came from. That was where the connections were coming from. And so after Wolf kind of got us all together, and we said, this is a thing we're going to do. We spent several months doing lots of visioning and connecting and sort of dotting the I's and crossing the T's to ensure that we were doing the right thing and for all the right reasons. Loud Capital talks about venture for people, right? And so yes, in this moment, the Pride Fund is thinking about the return, but more so it's about the return on the people. How are we working and uplifting our LGBTQ entrepreneurs, our LGBTQ businesses? How are we allowing them to feel welcome in a space that for far too long they probably felt like they couldn't bring their full selves to? I mean, think about it. Just up until this summer, you could be fired for being gay. It was like that, it was there, right? And so just up until the Bostic rule in the summer, that was a thing. And so I'm sure there's still places and spaces where people will get around that and still work to fire people for whatever reason. But literally until this summer, you could go to work and get married and then get fired the next day because you were gay. So I think our ability as the Pride Fund to be able to empower a group, a generation of people to bring their full selves to work is amazing. To bring their full selves to the things that they do is amazing. We fully understand in the business community that the diversity of perspectives sitting around the table actually helps businesses more so than the similarity of thought. Right. So if it's a bunch of the same people sitting around the table trying to solve a problem, you're probably not going to get too far, or your solutions are going to be pretty limited. But when you start to think about the diversity of perspective at that table, that's coming to solve a problem, that's going to be important. So it's the same thing in the venture space, right? When you think about sort of who traditionally have been funded in the venture space, it's sort of the same framework of people, the same sort of archetype. And so therefore the solutions probably all look the same on the other side. But once you start, again, in increasing the diversity of perspective at the table, solutions will look different. Problems will have new ways of being solved, and that's awesome and great. And that's how you diversify businesses. That's how you diversify ecosystems. That's how you create competition in the market. But again, at the same time, uplifting a group that often hasn't had the space to bring themselves to the work that they're doing.
Gotcha. Well, also you mentioned Wolf Star, and I see he's on the call as well. So shout out Wolf, and also thank you for your involvement and leadership as always. I keep saying leadership, and I feel like we've covered that. But yeah.
Oh no, I mean, use it. It's the word. It's the right.
Yeah.
I probably just need to lean into it, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we talk about leaning into leadership and leaning into your power and owning all these things, right? And I just probably need to own the word. I'm like, yes, I'm a leader. You know, I probably do need to own it, but it's hard. And as you said, I think it references back to the way that I was brought up. I think my mom would probably like just pimp slap me and say, no, you just like everybody else, right? Like, and I would appreciate that because I would be humbled. And there's a good friend of ours, actually one of our venture partners, Tom Brody, invited me onto his 7 Minutes of Sunshine program. If you haven't watched it on Facebook, I encourage you to watch it. 7 Minutes of Sunshine. It's actually kind of amazing. And I had an opportunity to get on there earlier in June, and he has people come on and he wants you to highlight your superpowers. So sort of what are these things, your values that you believe in, and then what's your superpower? You know, and I talked about empathy being sort of the superpower that I have. But that's been fed by visions and understandings of access and equity and humility. And I think that's just the way that I was brought up, is that you should always be humble. So I again, the leadership, right? And I need to lean into it, but it's just the way that it's been instituted in my mind. Being humble is more important.
Yeah. So empathy is like a really interesting idea. And sometimes there's a distinction that's made between sympathy and empathy, where sympathy, you feel what the other person's feeling, and when empathy is you understand it, but you don't internalize it. And I wanted to know, sort of with being an empath, do you ever feel like overwhelmed from empathy or from being in, you know, a space that's challenging, or like I know in certain fields there's like attrition, with like nurses or caretakers and things like that, because they feel the empathy for the patients, and then it causes, you know, a churn.
Exhaustion.
Yeah.
No, it's a real thing. And honestly, I have only in the last couple of years started putting language to what I was experiencing. I often say people exhaust me. And I mean that with all the love in the world, right? Like, people exhaust me, but that's because I am an empath, right? Like, because when Katie sits down in the room, I'm KDP, I'm talking about you. We haven't really met, but at the time when KDP and I are like engaging with each other, I see her. And so therefore then I think about, think about all the things, right? Like, I think, okay, well, I see her, but are those the gender pronouns that she uses? She wears glasses. Like, do I need to think about glasses and what that means? I wear glasses too, like brown hair. Like, I think about her experience. What is Katie's background? Like, does she have two moms? So I think that's what happens when I engage with people. I think about all the things that brought them to this moment and the space they're in, and that's exhausting, right? Because then I start thinking about how I engage with each person differently. And not everyone does that. As I said, we so often think of people and groups as monoliths, but so yeah, so I understand when empaths, and I'm embracing
Yeah.
this is a new one in my last couple of years to embrace. Like that's why I say people are exhausting. I love people. I could
Mhm.
sit. I mean, if you could put me in a room with two people and I could just sit down and we can just kind of like drink tea or whatever it is, watch TV and like connect and on that intimacy of level, that's fine. But even if we're sitting in the room quietly together, trust me, that's exhausting for me.
Mhm.
Like I often have to leave my home or spaces and go into places where I know that I can't see other people, so that I can really focus in on my work. You know, but I think the distinction is sort of there between sympathy and empathy is that I take it in so deeply,
Mhm.
that I start to internalize and feel it, more so than others. And I think that those who have um, uh, intersectional identities that are immeasurable or kind of a lot, that happens often because you are always thinking, what would happen if, or how would my identity in this space interact in this particular way. So yeah, I love people, but people are exhausting, and that's partly because as an empath, you are thinking about
Mhm.
all of these things when you engage with people, so frequently,
Yeah.
and then oftentimes you think about it after you leave them, right? So so even after I've walked away, I will think, did I say the right thing? Did I ensure that I acknowledge the person appropriately? Did I do something that will impact their trajectory or journey in the future? That's I mean that's what empaths consider. That's how they sort of think
Yeah.
about the world in which they engage.
So, with that, how do you sort of fit that kind of into the world, the cold world, as it will, of VC, and like, how do you sort of strike a balance between like finding like profitability and stuff like that, and also sort of understanding stories and being inclusive? How do you balance
Yeah.
those? Is there a balance? Does it need to be balanced, or?
I would say that the Pride Fund is, um, and Loud Capital, and I mean, there's some others out there. I think what we are doing is trying to change that conversation in the VC and startup ecosystem.
Mm.
Right. I think we're trying to sort of ensure that more conversation about the full person is also being included in the conversation about the return of profit.
Mm.
And we know, I believe, that as we are looking at things, right, VCs, with you're looking at who you're investing in. So oftentimes you even go into some places and you see that VCs will come in and say, "We'll give you money if you get rid of your CEO."
Mm.
Right? Like if you do X, we will do that. Some people do that, right? Is it appropriate? I don't. Look. I think at certain point, this is the humanist in me, right? Like I think what we do is we work to empower and direct folks to the right position and place where they should be, so they can be successful. And so I think that's sort of what we're talking about is how do we identify ventures that are going to be
Mm.
that are going to have return, which is important, but we also want to find ventures that have people that we believe that we can empower and uplift and bring to the world because they're
Mm.
doing something great or because they are great. I think we take it a step further and just saying, we're not just simply giving you dollars. We're investing in everything. How do we uplift you? Can we connect you with one of our advisors who may be able to offer support or assistance or growth in a certain space? Do you just need feedback? We're here for that.
Mm.
This is not you didn't cut it, so get out of our face. It is how do we empower you to continue to be great and amazing in all that you're doing. And so even for companies that we may not choose to invest in, we try to give some feedback, and not necessarily that sort of hard feedback of like, this is a ridiculous idea. Da, da, da. It might be you may want to rethink or reframe this. Like maybe you need to, drill down in this particular area more. But
Mm.
it's ensuring that if someone goes back out again into the world, that they feel a little bit more empowered than they did the first time. So
Mm.
I think that's a conversation we're changing, right? Like we're trying to ensure that venture is for people. That's ultimately, I believe, all the things that the solutions and the products that we're creating are for the humans, for the most part, or the puppy and animals that we love. It's still for the human. I don't think that in this world we're creating technology for technology's sake, we're creating technology to help and benefit people. So we should always remember that venture is about and for people. And so I think that's a lot of the work that we do, is try to remind people of the humanity in the work that we're doing. At the end of the day, someone says yes, someone says no. There are people behind that, and we shouldn't be cold. Everyone wants to be happy, and so we don't need to be cruel when we are saying no. We don't need to be cold as we walk away. We can build relationships that maybe in the future can benefit us. I often used to say to team members, sort of not in public maybe, but in these silent one-on-one moments, I believe in sending out minions into the world, right? That's how I think about it, right? Like if you, people might say don't burn bridges, fine, whatever, that's don't burn bridges. I think of it as minions, right? Like if you are good to the person, that person sees humanity in you, and therefore then they hopefully in time or in the future, you may need that person. Or they might say, you know what, I'm working with so-and-so, and I thought that it would be really great to connect you with this person because of the humanity that you showed me. That's what we should be doing in this venture space, right? That's what really this is all about, I think. And that's the message that, the message and the program that we do at Pride Fund and with Loud Capital.
Love it. So just for like the basic logistic kind of considerations, so what does the fund like to do in terms of stage? Do you like to lead rounds? Like what kinds of stages for companies do you look for?
So we are pre and early for the most part. So right at that very beginning, I think, and we've got some others that have been on sort of the cusp of amazing, I guess, wherever they are in that journey. So I don't want to say how too late, but we're really focusing on those early stage and pre-stage folks, because I think what we can do is impact early and grow with. Right. I think again, it's not saying that if someone is at a different point in position in what they're bringing to us, that we won't jump into that and say, wow, that's a really great investment. But I think again, it again comes back to what can we do to also uplift and help the organization move forward. So if you seem fully formed and baked, it's not just us writing a check. We want to also again think about what other ways we can work to uplift the work that you're doing.
Gotcha. And just to clarify, it's a fund. Is it only for LGBTQ founders? Is that right?
So in essence, I like to say it's LGBTQ founders and ventures.
Okay.
Right. So oftentimes what you'll find is that if you are an LGBTQ founder, then the startup you're leading may sometimes be LGBTQ related. So it doesn't. And then sometimes as the organization grows, maybe the founder steps into a different position or whatever it is, but it's still an LGBTQ related venture and there's still connection to that community. So it's important. We still want to uplift it and possibly invest in that too.
Gotcha. So in my research, and I think it might have even been from one of your articles, there was a stat that said something like 10% of venture funding goes to women, people of color, and LGBTQ founders, which means each one of those is a subset of that 10%.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I guess my question for you is, what do you think the explanation is for this sort of disparity in funding? And do you have any sense of what the percentage is for just the LGBTQ, or is that even tracked, or like what kind of understanding do you have of that?
Yeah, I think a number of questions there. I think the LGBTQ percentage. Oh no, you're fine. You're fine. You're good.
Yeah.
The LGBTQ percentage. I think sometimes people say it's like 1% or less or something in that space. It's a hard representation to quantify and qualify and follow because, again, as we said and highlighted, LGBTQ people don't often come out. It is a silent identity that doesn't need to be spoken about. But again, what we're trying to do is encourage people to identify in those spaces and places. And you are correct. Yes, that 10% is sort of a conglomerate of all of those different identities. I think it goes back to something I said earlier in just relation to representation, right? Who people see, therefore then is who they will likely invest in again, right? So if venture folks only see a certain type of person in front of them, they will only continue to invest in that because it's quickly it replicates easily and well, right? It's sort of a for sure thing, versus doing the work to think outside of the box, to see that there are other segments and markets that are just as for sure things, but they just might not be familiar with it, right? So again, my intersectional identity, sitting at the table as a gay Black Caribbean man who has who has a trans siblings, and who has lesbian siblings, and who was raised by raised by an interracial family, who has white siblings, who, I mean, when I sit down at the table, I know that people across all these spectrums have been successful and can be successful. But if someone who, again, is myopic in terms of what they've engaged with, they don't know that someone who doesn't look like what they've seen before can be successful or has success in these arenas and spaces. So I think that's really what it is. I mean, this summer I like to say I put the smackdown on an SEC group, but this is exactly what was, they invited to talk about diversity as they are looking at sort of redefining standards of investment and qualifying. And I think they've made some changes, but this particular group was talking about diversity investment, and it was mostly looking at people of color and women of color in this space. And I was sort of the silent identity, right? Or the blended identity. Here I was as a Black guy, but also a gay guy talking about it. And I had to say to them, I said, look, I said, as much as I appreciate sort of this group coming together, I need to take a moment and acknowledge that I think it was maybe 3 Black women who were in this group of 20, 25 people. And I said, I am so proud to see your faces here, because I know that you showing up literally forces everyone in this room to look and think differently about who can and be sitting at this table in the future. So I think that's it. I mean, I think it literally is just thinking about who's physically in the room will change how people see who can also be included in the conversation.
Gotcha. I'll make this my last question before we open it up. If people be thinking, and if you have any questions, and if not, I'll just assume we did a fantastic interview. But so I guess my sort of last question is, for the startup community, and with what you're doing now, how do you think we can help make an impact in this arena? What can we do to help support the mission and be involved with what you're doing?
Talk about us? No, I mean, that's the easy. No, honestly, I think it's encouraging. It's encouraging communities to come out. That sounds sort of simplistic in nature, but I think it really is that. It's encouraging people that even when it's not central to their story, it may be helpful to moving something forward for someone else, right? And I think bringing a little bit, to me anyway, when I'm getting to know a venture, it's important for me to get a little bit of who they are in their presentation, or however they're bringing whatever they're bringing to me. It does help. Lucas, you pointed this out, right? Like, it does help to understand a little bit of their story, in relation to why they are here and doing what they're doing. I had an opportunity to sit down last week with several of Pride Fund's partners at Start Out, at NGLCC, and we talked about, my question to them was, what brings you to the work? So different from probably what a normal conversation about VC and investment is about, but I really kind of wanted to hit at their heart. What brings you to the work of the work? Like, why are you inspired to be here and do these things? And I do believe that the more we are able to encourage communities to talk about sort of what inspires them and what their backgrounds are that brings them to doing what they're doing, that'll change the conversation as well, in relation to who's sitting at the table, but also how people decide to invest and believe in those who are leading these organizations and companies. So that's sort of a lofty thing. But going back to it, yeah, just literally talking about the great work that the Pride Fund is doing. I think if people understand and see that there is an investment vehicle out there that exists in this space, then people will start thinking differently about other types of investment vehicles that can be out there to uplift the communities plural, in different ways. So whether it's focusing on African American women, whether it's focusing on international perspectives in the US in terms of investment, whether it's whatever those sort of communities where they don't often feel supported. I think if we're just literally representing and showing and demonstrating in the media that there are investors out there willing to invest in you, I think that is literally helpful. It changes the conversation.
Awesome. Well, I do kind of want to go around because, we have part of this mission for Startup Grind is to connect people here. And whether you have a question or not, it would be awesome if we could just say a little bit like who we are, what brings us to Startup Grind. And if you do have a question for Densil, now would be a good time. So, Alan, let's start with you. Would you just tell us a little bit about who you are, what brings you to Startup Grind, and if you have any questions, feel free to answer them, or you can say, pass and we'll throw it off to another person, or I might ask another couple questions because I got a few others as well.
Well, my name's Alan Proctor, and I started Social Ventures, and our whole shtick is advancing mission-based businesses. It's become a very dynamic sector. But we learned a lot along the way, and it leads to a couple questions I have for you, Densil, because I am delighted to see that much of your focus is on the culture and values of who you want to invest in. My question is how you plan to incorporate that. And I'll give you kind of two examples. Ownership of what we find in social enterprise, ownership doesn't tell you anything about the culture of the company. It just tells you who owns it. The second thing that we've kind of observed is some people who really are starting a business to advance a purpose don't want to be growth stage. So they're not looking for growth capital. They're looking for, unfortunately, the VC world uses the unfortunate term of calling them lifestyle businesses, but they want to stay local. They want to help their neighborhood. They want to help their community. And they view going national as compromising that. So I love what you're doing, but I'd like to get your insights on how you plan to go down that journey.
Yeah, well, thank you, Alan. Thank you for being here. I think probably the second question may be easier, and maybe because the first question I kind of got a little clouded for me. I think we are not discouraging folks from staying local if that's what they're working at, right? So I think if their product or whatever they're bringing to the table is profitable in that space and that's where they're doing it, then that's fine. I think what we are looking at and working with are folks who say I want this just to be in my community, but also those who are saying my product is something to serve on a larger scale. It's not. I think we may give advice and say you may be missing out on an opportunity to grow this in a particular way. But that should be brought to us, I think, in the conversation, right? Like when someone is pitching something to us, they explain to us what their vision is, and we either say, okay, yeah, that makes sense, or no, that doesn't make sense. But we're not going to, I believe, invest in something and then push them in a direction that they didn't intend to be in. That's a partnership moment. So again, if we believe that we can uplift them in the space that they're looking to grow in, then we'll be there. But if we also don't think that that's where we're going to see the return appropriately, then we're not going to just do it just to do it. So I don't know. Hopefully that answers that part. I think you are correct. The owner of the company does not dictate necessarily the culture of the company, which is part of the reason why I mentioned earlier in terms of sort of getting to know the person who's leading the organization, and sort of getting a sense of what motivates them to be in this space. We've luckily had the privilege, and we have a really great team supporting us, that as we do our due diligence, we are having sort of these intimate conversations with folks. We sit down with the team and we chat. We get to know who they are. We laugh about things, or we don't. But before we make a decision, we do try to establish sort of this sense of who they are and what they're about. And that helps us also make a determination as to whether or not we're going to invest. If the person that is bringing this idea to us doesn't seem like someone we believe we can uplift and empower in a certain way, then we're just not going to make that investment. I think that's how it works. But if we find someone who has the energy and the excitement or whatever it is, right? Maybe they're actually a quiet person, and their energy and excitement isn't the same thing like mine when I know that I have to. I'm an introvert. Like literally, this camera turns off and I'm ready to go put on my PJs and recharge, right? But some people present that way all the time, and I think only through these conversations of engagement and connection are we able to understand that and say, you know what, it's okay. You can be quiet, but we see that you have passion and energy and belief, and that's what you're spilling over to the team members that you're bringing into the organization. And so that's where we make that assessment. And again, in determining even before the investment that we are going to do it because we believe in who's there. I'll use, we talk about, we try to highlight companies that we believe in, and Reverie is one of them. If you've not heard of Reverie TV, I encourage you to check into it. And it's been phenomenal to sort of learn and engage with Reverie. For example, they have 4 co-founders, and looking and engaging with each one of them, very different. But learning and meeting all of them, they all have the same passion and dedication and energy to the idea, and so therefore we move forward and engage with them. So I think that's how we make those determinations, is through the conversations and engagement before just sort of pulling the trigger.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Great question and great answer. So I want to call on Mr. William Santos. You don't have to ask the question if you don't have a question, but I would like to just know, like, what brings you to Startup Grind? What do you do? And you feel free to ask the group anything if you have an ask or what. But you are on mute, so unmute yourself.
I was just waiting for you to finish.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm not an entrepreneur. I am a junior software engineer currently attending Tech Elevator. I am part of the LGBT community, so I saw this was on our calendar and I was like, I must attend to kind of get a feel for how LGBT companies that are in development are actually being allowed to develop. So this has been a really, really cool thing to attend. As a result of my own personal background, I don't really have a question necessarily, so I'll punt that off to someone else, and they can use my count and throw a question at Densil, because I'm pretty sure anything I throw at him wouldn't be adequate enough.
No, it's all good, and well, welcome and thank you. And obviously, Startup Grind is for everyone, whether you're an entrepreneur or not. So we're happy to have you here, and yeah, thank you for showing up. And William Wong, would you mind just telling us who you are, what brought you to Startup Grind, and if you have any questions for either Densil or the group, feel free to share.
No, great. Thank you for the opportunity. So I actually just networked with a Startup Grind in the DC area. He was a chapter president. So he pointed me to the website, and I'm just poking around, literally trying to see, what the Startup Grind is all about. So
are you in DC then?
I am in the DC area. That is correct.
Wow, that's cool. Thank you for coming.
But that said, I'm always curious to, obviously, learn everybody's perspective. So the question, I guess, for Densil is, from a venture capital standpoint, right? I mean, at the end of the day, even though you have a certain niche that you're going to focus on, you want to create that flywheel, right? Basically success begets success. And but at some point in time, have you thought about, once you created enough success, to portion some of that success out to help the nonprofits, not necessarily the ones that only have those unicorn ideas to grow?
That's a good question. I think and so I do sit and exist in sort of the nonprofit world as well. You know, as my actual company is Porteous Consulting, which focuses on nonprofit empowerment and capacity building, which I think translates to business as well. I think there are a lot of similarities in those spaces, but I think what I'm hoping. I sort of see in the relationship between the two spaces is more about the connection between the two spaces, right? So that people can see that there is actually more relationship and similarity than difference. You know, in nonprofit fundraising and for-profit fundraising and venture capital and fundraising. I think the distinction in terms of it, however, is what your return is. Right. So in nonprofit fundraising, your return is the reward in your heart, hopefully. And in venture, you hopefully will see that you get something in your pocket and the company grows. And I think it really, it's just for me about the representation and showing people that there's a connection between the two. I don't think there's anything more, right? So it's not a case or a space of saying I'm going to encourage venture or startups to give back to the nonprofit space. I think to me, it's a representation of saying, look at the similarities. And again, being able to use language from the nonprofit space to bring into the venture world so that we're changing how we communicate and empower people in that space. Even using language like empower, right? Like I think coming into the venture world with a different idiom allows us to start to shift what it looks like. And I think a little bit of the same in the nonprofit space. Many moons ago, you know, I started my career out working as a higher education administrator in admissions. And at some point in time, I said, there needs to be more business applied to higher education administration. People need to stop thinking about these institutions as just academic institutions. They are businesses. We need to run them as such. And so I think for me, that's the way I always think about sort of how I engage in both spaces, and hopefully the benefit of both places is to say, look at the similarities between the work that we're doing versus you are sitting over there and I don't have any idea or concept or understanding of what you're doing and how that's going to benefit me. I think my hope is that we'll see the benefit between the two spaces of for-profit, nonprofit engagement and fundraising.
Awesome. Great answer. Great question. Nikhil, do you want to hop in, say who you are, what brought you to Startup Grind? And if you have any questions for Densil, now would be your time.
All right. So thank you, Densil. That was amazing. And one of the reasons I am at Startup Grind is to hear that perspective and what makes the Columbus entrepreneur community tick, and how is it growing, and who's shaping it, and who's participating in it. Because, you know, it is something that is important for us to be aware of. It's otherwise it tends to have a lot of unknowns, and we may not feel like stepping up and participating in the rise that is happening in Columbus. So, so part of it is just to be here to get educated. I do have a question.
Awesome.
It's mostly around your own journey in terms of making investments and assessing whether some of them are successful or not successful, and at what point do you change your cultural lens to something more analytical, something more cold, and said, okay, this business doesn't make sense, or this founder has execution issues, or whatever may be the case. At what point do you go from that initial cultural lens to say, is this the person I want to do business with, to say, we have an execution issue, and how do you separate the two?
Thank you, and Nikhil, thank you for being here. And I want to say something about the Columbus venture and startup community that I think is important to highlight. You know, I've had the opportunity of experiencing New York and living in Atlanta and living in San Francisco Bay Area and being here in Columbus. And I think I believe the beauty of what we have here is as crazy as it sounds, is infused with this Midwestern value and spirit of being able to really come together and figure it out. I think there's a lot less air of competition in here than I do see in other markets. And so that's, and maybe I'm making that up, or maybe that's just because of the way that I do things, but I do feel that there's a greater willingness to lean into each other and help each other be successful here in Columbus. And maybe that's a Midwestern mentality across the board, but I feel that here in Columbus more than I have in other places. So I just want to acknowledge that I think the ecosystem here in Columbus is much friendlier and diverse in terms of where people are coming from. You know, Mark Kwame, who talks a lot about being brought here from California, you know, I think he saw the vision of what the Midwest could be, but I think he has been probably pretty pleasantly surprised about what Columbus has brought and how beautiful it is here. So that's one thing. I think the analytical thing comes into play in the very beginning. Let me not kid you. I mean, that is seen from the onset, you know, but I think we don't let it get that far. So it won't be we're not going to invest if we have concern about it. If we're doing our due diligence and really sort of looking into all those things, we will not invest in that space. If there's a modicum of something that we think is sort of, again, that we may be able to help uplift and bring them to a space of success in relation to analytic data, then sure, we'll still go down that path. I think post investment, that to me, that's a little bit late. If you've already invested and then you've got some concerns there, and that's when you start to say, okay, well, we've got to make some determination about how this is going to move forward. But that's holding someone accountable, and ultimately that's important, right? So we're not just, again, giving you money and walking away. We're also holding you accountable to a particular standard that we saw. So for us, it's at the beginning when we're making that due diligence process of making sure that analytically the metrics will meet up and we'll measure. I've sat in meetings with the team where we've kind of all probably looked at each other and been like, those numbers don't add up. What do we do now? You know, but that's kind of the feedback we also give back, right? Before we say, yes, this is going to happen, we might sit there and say, amazing person, wonderful energy, total commitment. These numbers just don't seem to be working appropriately. So that's something you need to go back and figure out before we make an investment, or if we make one at all.
Awesome. Well, folks, we are past 7, which was our cutoff time. So I'm afraid if we haven't had a chance to get to you, it might have to be at the next Startup Grind, which you are welcome to come out to next month. So if you want to come out to Startup Grind, we always love to have you. Anybody's welcome back anytime. And if we could just give one more round of applause to our speaker, Densil Porteous. Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed hearing some of your story and the vision for the fund. And of course, if we can be supportive, please let us know. You're welcome back anytime.
Well, thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate you all for being here and doing whatever you're doing in your own spaces. Continue showing up and being your full selves. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.